The African Parliamentarians Association for Human Rights, AfriPAHR, is a network of young African parliamentarians committed to advance democracy, human rights, and the right to freedom of religion or belief on the African continent. Now, the body is currently meeting for its strategic planning session in Cape Town. And to tell us more about AfriPAHR, the role it plays, and of course, what it intends to do given its position and the positions occupied by its members, we are now joined by the Steering Committee Chairperson and South African Member of Parliament, Nqabayomzi Kwankwa. And he's also, he will, if he does get back to us in time, will be joined by Honourable Markus Samuel, who is a member of the Nigerian Parliament, but currently in absentia. So thank you so much for your time this morning, Honourable Kwankwa. Good to see you again.
Yes, good morning, SK, and good morning to the viewers at home.
Let's perhaps just start by hopping back to AfriPAHR, why it was established, who its members are, and what the objectives are for this organization.
We are a network of, an independent network of African parliamentarians, mainly young African parliamentarians. So I should say predominantly young African parliamentarians. We have members of parliament who are affiliated to AfriPAHR as members all over the African continent. There's just over 100 of us who are members of the network. The only area that we have not been able to penetrate so far is the Arab Maghreb region, but all the other regions of the African continent and economic blocks are represented. Today, starting from yesterday, we have a steering committee meeting of AfriPAHR to actually detail and outline our plans rather for the next 3 years. And we, for the first time, managed to hold a hybrid session where members of parliament who could not join us, who are steering committee members of AfriPAHR from the DRC, from Camara, from Ghana, and other parts.
Well, unfortunately, that picture... just a little bit of a technical problem there, Honourable Kwankwa, with regard to the connection that we have. But if you can hear me, please just pick up on the last part where you were talking about the hybrid session. No
problem. I'm saying we held our first hybrid session starting from yesterday, where members of parliament who are members of the steering committee of AfriPAHR couldn't attend physically for various reasons, and a number of commitments were able to join us virtually as we're busy outlining our plan for the next 3 years. Today is the concluding session of the meeting, where we'll conclude the steering committee meeting of AfriPAHR, where we'll also adopt the three-year plan as to what our program of action is going to be. Sakina, you know the challenges that face the African continent from a perspective of democracy, because our mandate really is to promote and advance democracy and human rights in Africa, with specific focus in some instances on freedom of religion or belief, because of the persecution that people suffer around the continent for the belief systems and the faith that they hold. But you also have a problem in the African context and continent, where we are a numerical majority, but religiously we're a minority because we're being suppressed by dominant religions on the continent, where if you practice African spirituality, you are believed to be practicing witchcraft and all manner of other issues. So we discussed these issues, including the fact that obviously on the African continent, some of the countries have hardened into autocracy. You saw recently that there was a coup d'etat that took place in Burkina Faso. Coup d'etats are the order of the day in countries like Mali. And with these coup d'etats and instability and areas where countries have hardened into autocracy, there are gross human rights violations that take place there. And as members of parliament, we have a responsibility to use the platforms and the mechanisms that are available at our disposal to raise these issues with the members of the executive in instances where we're able to raise these issues in our own countries, but also escalate some of these issues to the African Union and the relevant regional blocs to do something about gross human rights violations that take place around the continent.
So just as an example, you are currently, as you pointed out, conducting a strategic session. But what have you raised thus far to bodies like the African Union as AfriPAHR?
You'll recall that we raised the issue of when 2018 DRC, we were the ones who raised the issues, the violations that were happening there. the refusal of the regime at the time to hold democratic elections, free and fair elections. We continue to raise those issues. For instance, what we also do is that in instances where we pick up, say, human rights violations in countries where we know that we have members of parliament, we would help the member of parliament to draft a motion that that person can then table in his or her own parliament and raise it with the relevant executives. What we also try to do, say, for example, hypothetically speaking, at a particular point in time, the chairperson of the AU is President Ramaphosa. Then members of AfriPAHR, when they escalate issues and complaints, they would ask the members of parliament who are members of parliament rather, who are based in South Africa to then write a letter and raise issues, ask questions about those issues that affect them in their own countries, so that the chairperson of the AU at the time can be able to address those issues as chair. So we try to do those issues. But also what we do is we would then capacitate members of parliament, provide them with the necessary support in order for them to be able to write letters, do motions in the House, for example, or offer matters for debate, or in instances where it's relevant and important, even undertake a session where we actually try to say how can they amend existing laws, what kind of influences can they make insofar as trying to change laws and policies of their own countries. So it's a holistic and a very comprehensive approach that focuses on the strengths and the work we do as members of parliament.
It is, of course, still a fledgling organization, but how effective do you think the process that you have outlined has been thus far? Because you spoke about the coups that we see ongoing. I mean, if you look we're not even talking since 10, 20 years ago. We're talking about the last 2-3 years, and already we have several coups on the African continent and attempted coups. So how effective can you really be as a group of young parliamentarians scattered across the African continent to actually make your voice heard and possibly speak on behalf of other billions of Africans who don't have a voice?
SK, the least we can do as leaders, elected public representatives, is to try and play an advocacy role, raise these issues, raise concerns, write to relevant stakeholders, and in instances where it's necessary to do so, undertake solidarity missions to get a better understanding and a better sense of what the issues are on the ground. And then when we come back from those solidarity missions, adopt programs of actions which are going to make sure that we raise issues, we suggest solutions to problems that exist. And obviously, we are a fledgling, as we are saying, fledgling network. We were only established in 2017. And one of the issues that have made it impossible for us to actually reach our optimal level in terms of the plans that we've adopted is actually obviously funding. But with a little bit of funding that we have, we're able to make an impact and to make a difference. We also self-fund some of our programs, where members of AfriPAHR then contribute and were able to undertake solidarity missions and other missions that we deem are important and relevant. For example, if you were to talk about the West African Challenge, it's obviously going to be up to the colleagues who are members of AfriPAHR, who are also members of the steering committee of AfriPAHR, to devise a strategy of how they are going to raise the coup d'etat that happened in Burkina Faso with the relevant regional bloc. Serve as a pressure group, but also serve as a voice for the voiceless.
So, with regard to the membership, surely you would like to see more members of parliament from across the continent join AfriPAHR, I would imagine, in order to strengthen your resolve. But also the question of funding that you touch on. And that's always a very tricky one, especially on a continent where coups and regime change are very often the order of the day, especially in certain regions of the continent. So who funds AfriPAHR, who have been your donors to this point? Because there's always skepticism about, a third hand and Western imperialism meddling in the affairs of Africa.
No, we don't have a third hand per se. What we have are partners that we implement our programs with. We work, for example, with the African Center for Parliamentarians in Ghana, ASAPA. We work with the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief. As you know, their secretariat is based in Norway. We also work with Asian Parliamentarians for Human Rights, AfriPAHR. Those are our partners mainly. We work jointly together when we implement programs and roll out programs. In the majority of instances, when they have programs to roll out in their respective regions, what usually happens is that we'll have one or two members of AfriPAHR joining in there so that we can be able to gain the relevant experience, but also to be able to understand their contexts. And that's how we work. When it comes to Africa, it's difficult to get funding in Africa. I don't know whether it's because the initiative, for example, came from an opposition party member, but it seems in the majority of instances, especially in South Africa, you must be in some or other governing party in order for private donors to take you seriously. It doesn't matter how good your proposal is on paper. Hence, it's easy to find international partners than it is to find South African people who are willing to donate financially to such causes. But we're doing very well. Despite all the resource constraints, we're doing very well.
So, Honourable Kwankwa, just from your colleagues in the South African Parliament, be they in the National Assembly or, even, by the way, do you accept members from lower structures, or is it only national organs, as in national parliaments?
Usually it depends. It usually depends on the people who are prepared to fund a specific program. Some funders would say, for example, they would only, because of their mandate, only be willing and able to fund a program where only national MPs, right, were part of that program. But in instances, I think we undertook a mission to Washington, D.C. recently, I think a couple of years ago, 2 years ago. Some of the members of parliament were members of provincial legislature who came from, if my memory serves me well, from Canada. So it depends on what the requirements of the funder and the funding are at the time. But generally, the funders that we have currently, they focus on national MPs.
And that, of course, was my segue to ask about recruitment of more members of parliament from South Africa, young members of parliament. How has that been going for you? Is there appetite? Why aren't they joining? How many have joined?
Well, we have Angel Kanyile from the Democratic Alliance, who's a member of the steering committee of AfriPAHR. Not so long ago, we had Liesl van der Merwe. We did try to recruit other members of parliament from the governing party. I remember I had a discussion not so long ago, for example, with Honourable Mandla Mandela from the African National Congress. And obviously, due to various commitments, he couldn't make it to one of our meetings. But the door is always open for our colleagues from all political parties to join and be part of AfriPAHR. But obviously, when you join AfriPAHR, a network that is almost 4 years, 5 years old now, you will have to join as a member before you become a steering committee member. There's a tendency among some of the colleagues, not here in South Africa, to think that when you become a member of AfriPAHR, automatically you become a member of the steering committee. And that's up to the membership of AfriPAHR and not up to me, really. So yes, everyone is allowed to be a member of AfriPAHR.
This is a young continent, Honourable Kwankwa, as you know, and obviously it makes sense that you would see the emergence of more young leaders on the continent taking centre stage. A party like the EFF, for example, which is a very youthful party, why are they not more represented? Are they represented at all, given their stance as well, the Pan-Africanist stance that they adopt? Are they members of AfriPAHR?
Well, I did speak to their deputy president, I think a couple of years ago, though. I think it was 2017, 2018. I did speak to their deputy president at the time, encouraging MPs of EFF to join. People are welcome to join AfriPAHR as members and to make their contributions to AfriPAHR, to the network. I think at the time they were otherwise engaged. They had other priorities at the time. I remember we started by talking about the young concerned parliamentarians, if you remember. There was a problem with Fees Must Fall campaign in the country, and we're trying to make decisive interventions as young leaders. I discussed the young concerned parliamentarians with him. And in addition to that, I recall myself discussing AfriPAHR with the deputy president of the EFF. But we never had a second-round discussion because even that discussion was informal. But everyone is allowed. We encourage everyone, appeal to everyone, because this is a Pan-Africanist program, really, that seeks to make a difference on the African continent.
Well, we have to leave it there, but interesting. And of course, we'll keep an eye on the developments, and please keep us posted as well. Steering Committee Chairperson and South African Member of Parliament, Nqabayomzi Kwankwa, talking to us there about AfriPAHR and, of course, what they are busy with at the moment as young parliamentarians from the African continent, from various countries.